Welcome to this afternoon session of this conference. Let me first introduce Professor M.A. Lakshmi Tatachar from Bangalore. He is a well-known scholar in Vishishtadvaita. And before he starts his speech, let's welcome Professor Jodh Singh, the second speaker. Please. From Punjab University, Patiala. Well, before we start these speeches, let me just tell that 1 hour has been fixed for each lecture, including the discussion, so that we can maintain the time schedule. So I request both the speaker to check with this time so that we can complete the whole session in time and go for the tea break at 4:30. May I request now Professor M.A. Lakshmi Tatachar to speak on his paper, that is Universality in Vishishtadvaita.
Namasadase, Namasadasasapate. Vande Vedanta Karpura Chami Karakarandakam Ramanujariya Mariyanam Chudamani Maharnisham Chidachit Paratattvanam Tatvayatharthyavedine Ramanujaya Mune Namo Mamagariyase Yo Nityam Achyuta Padambujayugmarukmam Vyamohatastaditarani Trinayamene Asmadguror Bhagavatosya Dayeka Sindhoho Ramanujasya Charanau Sharanam Prapadye Apagata Madamanaihi Antimopaya Nishtaihi Adhigata Paramarthaihi Arthakamanapekshaihi Nikhilajana Suhridbhihi Nirjita Krodhalobhaihi Varavaramuni me Nityayogaha. Friends, before I make the regular presentation, I would like to mention a few things which were mentioned in another session. Since Dr. Jha wants me to repeat those things to you before I go to my presentation, regular presentation. According to me, every philosophy and religion aims at the same thing. No religious leader wants his followers to quarrel with others and say your religion is the best religion and all the other religions and philosophies are useless philosophies, etc., etc. In fact, if Muhammad, Holy Christ, Ramanuja, Shankara, Madhvacharya, if they had coexisted, probably they would not have quarreled with each other. They would have had such a wonderful cohesion and they would see eye to eye when they were thinking of the society. From that point of view, each and every philosophy aims at destroying two important things. In Sanskrit, it has been very beautifully stated. Every human being has got two enemies, basic enemies. Aham, mama. Aham, mameti vyaksharo mrityuhu, that has been stated. And if you have got aham, that's also another mrityu. Is there any person who is devoid of aham in this world? Every philosophy tries to put an end to this aham. How to see the death of the ego, that is the most important thing. Whether it is Mohammedanity or Christianism or any other system of philosophy, it doesn't very much matter from my point of view. But each acharya or philosopher followed a different path to achieve this particular goal. How to put an end to the death of the ego. Shankaracharya had his own method, according to me. I have got great respect to Shankaracharya. And at the same time, I am thrilled to be here because in the birthplace of Shankaracharya, I am mentioning something about Shankaracharya. It is because of the Chinmaya Foundation and also because of the compassion and also grace showered by Professor Jha on me. So, Shankaracharya wanted to see that people should be devoid of ego. How to achieve this? According to him, you go on inflating your ego to such an extent, everything merges in that. When there is only one person, who can quarrel with whom? When there is only one reality, who can quarrel with whom? Yatra khalo sarvam atmaiva bhut, tatra kena kam pashyet, kena kam vijaniyat. That's what the Upanishad says. So, you inflate your ego to such an extent, everything merges in that. And there cannot be another Christian who says, no, I cannot accept your philosophy. And there cannot be a Ramanujaya saying, no, I cannot accept your philosophy, because both of us merge in the Soham or something, or in the Supreme Brahman. So in that way, he wanted to extinguish the ego of the human beings by saying everything ultimately merges in Brahman, and you are one with Brahman, there is no other second person. Yatra khalu sarvam atmaiva bhut kena kam pashyet kena kam vijaniyat. That is the statement of the Upanishad. So, on the other hand, Ramanuja said, you reduce your ego to such an extent, because when you think of the whole of this universe, where are you? Where is Lakshmitacharya standing? If you think of the picture of the entire universe, can you think of Chinmaya Research Foundation? Where is it? Or where it is located? And it is not even a small speck, and Lakshmitacharya is nowhere here in this Chinmaya Foundation. So in that way, you must always understand that you are so much insignificant. According to me, there is macrocosm and microcosm have got close relationship. Every human being is a microcosm, and there is a macrocosm. And in Ayurveda, we have got a statement, Purusha Sammito Lokaha. That means every human being is the replica of the Supreme Being. Whatever you see in the macrocosm, you can also see in the microcosm. Many a times people ask me, how many souls you possess? Yes, I possess the soul of Mr. Lakshmitacharya, but at the same time in my body, millions and millions of cells are there, each possessing their own soul. According to the worldview of Ramanuja, what happens? All these subsystems, sub-subsystems, sub-sub-subsystems, etc., they are all functioning in such a cohesive way to support the main system. This systemic view is very, very important from the point of view of Ramanuja. You think of the entire world or entire universe as one single system. We are all just like bacteria in that system. And each and every bacteria has to do its functioning properly. It should not malfunction. But certain bacteria go astray and they begin to malfunction also. Still what happens? The universe continues. As it happens in the case of our car or something, the system continues to run. Even some bolts, nut, etc. fall. Still it can be managed. In the same way, though several cells are working against our own system, sometimes you can continue. There is a tolerance level. Till the tolerance level is reached, you can continue. And if it goes beyond the tolerance level, probably the system will collapse. Many a times I tell people, don't be afraid of pralaya or something. There was so much of publicity regarding the deluge, etc., which will happen in 2012, etc. I said, why are you afraid? You can bring deluge only today if all of you are malfunctioning. On the other hand, you can postpone it if you are functioning properly in the macrocosm. So all these microorganisms which are functioning in the universe, if they function properly, probably the system will continue for a long time and it will be sustained. Now, another interesting thing is, when you think of the systemic view of Ramanuja, you come across very interesting things. Ramanuja accepts Parinamavada as well as absence of Parinama also in the Supreme God. He is Nirvikara and at the same time he is having Vikara. Sadvaraka Parinama he accepts and Advaraka Parinama he doesn't accept in the Supreme Being. Sadvaraka Parinama in the sense, through the human body, there could be so many changes. Through the Prakriti, there can be so many changes in the Brahman. Because according to Ramanuja, the concept of Brahman is Chidachid Vishishtam Brahma Ekameva Paramarthaha. We are also Advaitins. Because Vedanta Deshika says in his Nyaya Siddhanjana, we accept only one Brahman, which is Chidachid Vishishta. We are not Kevala Advaitins, we are Vishishta Advaitins. So, in such a way, Ramanuja reconciles so many other things. I have to say so many things about how Ramanuja has taken so much from Shankara. Many people do not say that. In fact, I want to say that. Particularly, when he is explaining the concept of illusion, generally the example given is the serpent and the rope. Ramanuja says, some of the elements of the serpent is also present in the rope. That's why you mistake it for serpent. Where did Ramanuja take this particular idea? Because Shankara, while he was explaining his this particular illusion, he said, it is neither Sat nor Asat. Satchete na badhyeta, asatchete na pratibadhyeta. That's what he said. So in that way, he explained the illusion. I am not going into details because all of you are scholars, so I am not going into all the details. Satchen na badhyeta, asatchen na pratibadhyeta. Probably Ramanuja took the first view and he said, if the serpent is not present in the rope, how can you mistake it for a serpent? Has anybody mistaken a rope for a tiger or an elephant? It is not possible, you know. So that means some of the elements found in the serpent should be found here. Otherwise, it cannot be accepted. Probably Ramanuja took this view and he advocated his Satkhyati. He said, Yathartham sarva vijnanam iti veda vidam matam, etc. So in that way, people are so much indebted, acharyas are so much indebted to their previous acharyas. Though there appears to be some of the views are conflicting, etc., etc., there is a sort of all-inclusiveness, that's what I want to tell you. So I will not go into those details. Next thing I want to mention is, in the morning I mentioned about a story with regard to the death of the ego or the giving up of the ego. It seems there was a student who was studying under two important teachers. Both of them were outstanding Sanskrit scholars and Vedanta scholars. One was a Pakka Advaita scholar and the other one was a traditional Vishishta Advaita scholar. First, the student went to the Advaita scholar and he learned something from him. And after the class was over, the teacher said, always you should go on remembering this particular statement, Soham, 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 etc. Always you say Soham, 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 I am that Brahman, etc. Then he went to the other teacher, who was a scholar in Vishishta Advaita. Then he asked him, out of curiosity, what did he teach? He taught me Advaita Vedanta and ultimately said, always you remember this particular statement, mention Soham, 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 etc. every time. Then the Vishishta Advaita scholar said, yes, that's also okay. I am very happy that he has taught you. But he has left one more letter. You add one more letter to that and always chant Dasoham, Dasoham, Dasoham. I am subservient to the Supreme Being. Say like that. So he accepted that, came back to the other teacher. Again, this teacher asked him, what did the Vishishta Advaitin teach you? He said, whatever you have taught is okay. But one more letter is missing, he has added one more letter. He has made it Dasoham. Then the Advaita teacher said, yes, that is also okay for me. I will add one more letter, you please mention that. So that is Sa. Then it becomes Sada Soham, always I am that Parabrahman, Supreme Brahman. So he accepted that and went back to the Vishishta Advaitin again. Then he asked, what did he teach again? He has mentioned that Sada Soham, I should chant Sada Soham, etc., etc. Then the Vishishta Advaitin says, even that is acceptable. But please remember to add one more letter, that is Dasa Dasoham. I am the devotee of the devotee, or I am the slave of the devotee here afterwards. That is Vishishta Advaita. But when you listen to this particular story, both of them aim at the same thing, that is giving up our own ego. Here you say Dasa Dasoham, or there you say Soham. That means you merge in the Supreme Brahman or you become subservient to the Supreme Brahman. So in both ways, they aim at the same thing. That's what I want to say. That is ego. And the other thing we have to give up is this mamakara, ahankara, mamakara. According to me, whether it is Jainism or Buddhism or any other ism, all of them teach only these two things: how to give up this ahankara and mamakara. That's why many times I tell people, whether your education is egocentric education or it is ecocentric education. One small letter has to be changed. Whether it should be egocentric or ecocentric, ECO. I think if you make it ecocentric, probably we will be safe. And all these philosophies aim at that particular thing only. Now I'll do my presentation. Just 1 minute. I did research work in the philosophy of Vishittadvaita nearly for the last 40 years. Then, when I was studying Sribhashya, one thing used to bother me. Suppose if Ramanuja was asked to prepare an education system, what would he prepare? What would be the syllabus? How he would view education? What type of education we should think of? Then, with this point of view, when I went through Sribhashyam, I came across very interesting results. I would like to mention some of those things before you. And don't think it's a great research work I have done or anything. On the other hand, with my little knowledge of philosophy and with my very little knowledge in research, etc., I have done something which I want to show it to you. So, first and foremost thing is, what is education? According to me, education is a samskara given to the human being. Ramanuja defines samskara in such a wonderful way in his Sribhashyam. Samskaro hi nama karyantara yogyata karanam. Samskaro hi nama karyantara yogyata karanam. As it is, certain things are not very clean. You have to purify them. Suppose you want to see your image in the mirror. It is full of dust. What will you do? You just wipe off the dust. It is called the samskara of the mirror. In the same manner, for the human being also, some samskaras have to be done. I am not mentioning about the 16 samskaras, which are also part and parcel of this anyway. I am mentioning about the Vidya samskara, how the Vidya samskara has to be given. So, once you study something, once you get educated, what happens? You will be refined. A sort of refinement comes in, or it's a sort of value addition according to me. Value addition to the human being for the specific purpose for which he is created. This is a very important point from my point of view. Generally, when I teach Western students who come to me, I think Indians are no way better. I'll mention these 2 points to them frequently. How many of you have used computers? I'll ask them. Everybody will raise their hand. As soon as you buy a computer, what do you get? Oh, we will get some boxes. That is one hard disk and keyboard and also monitor, etc. What do you call them? They say it is hardware. Okay, I accept it. Suppose you bring the computer to your house, you keep the system in some place. Does it work? Sir, how can it work? We have to plug it into your PowerPoint, so power flows into it, then it begins to work. Okay, so you have accepted one more quotient, that is power in the computer, otherwise it will not work. Number 3, suppose you have connected to a PowerPoint and then the electricity is flowing, computer is on. Can you work with it? It's impossible. You have to introduce an artificial intelligence into the computer through software. So you have to install certain software, otherwise it cannot work. So these 3 levels they understand very clearly. We also can understand hardware and then the power which flows into it, and then the third kosha, namely the manomaya kosha or something, or the intelligence which is artificially introduced into the computer. Then I will mention about the human system. Do you agree that the human system is far superior compared to the computer system? Everybody will nod their head, yes, definitely it is a far superior computer system. In the human system, what is the hardware? The Annamaya Kosha, he was mentioning in the morning, there are 6 elements in the human body, and that Annamaya Kosha is the hardware in this. This Annamaya Kosha cannot function without the flow of the prana into this Annamaya Kosha, just like the power in the computer. The third level is you should have the brain, thinking brain, or this is the central processing unit which you possess. So that is Manomaya Kosha. And then I ask those students, have you come across any computer which says, today I am very much fed up and disappointed and dejected, don't give me any work. On the other hand, someday it will say, I am extremely in a happy mood, give me any amount of work I will do. Then they will say, sir, how can the computer say all these things? Because it has no feelings. Why it has no feelings? Because it doesn't have consciousness. Oh, you have recognized one more quotient in this. That is Vijnanamaya Kosha. Then one more kosha they accept according to Vishishta Advaita, it is Anandamaya Kosha, which represents the supreme being. In this way, every human system is composed of 5 important koshas. If we recognize this, probably it is very easy to understand what type of education has to be given to the individual and for what purpose this human system is designed. Very interesting thing is, we don't have systems just like the computer systems. It is Pentium 4, Pentium 5, Pentium 6, etc., etc. Every human being sitting here is unique. I tell my students many times, you cannot see the same type of nose or same type of the eye in 2 individuals. It is impossible. Every human being is unique. If every human system is designed for a specific purpose, should we not know the purpose for which it is created? Only when we know that, probably we will be able to work or function in the proper manner. You can use the chair as our politicians use it for hitting others also, but at the same time you can use the chair for sitting. But it is designed for sitting, not for hitting. Is it not so? But most of the times, we human beings who are the end users of our own system do not realize that we should go through the manuals or we must get trained by great people to know how to use this particular system properly and use it for the specific purpose for which it is created. Do we know that? We are just like the children or small child which is hitting any button of the computer and also clicking the mouse wherever it wants. If it is used in that particular way, many times the hard disk may crash. Then if you go back to the shopkeeper who has sold it to you, he will say, I cannot give you any warranty because we have misused your system. In the same manner, God will say, I will not give you 100 years warranty if you misuse your system without looking into the manual or without being trained by a person who knows how to use it. That's why we go to the acharyas. So from this point of view, education is such a wonderful thing. It makes you understand the purpose of your life. In our Shastras, it has been stated there are 4 goals, namely Dharma, Artha, Kama and Moksha. Many a times, when I am giving the interpretation of Dharma, I will mention it is nothing but do's and don'ts. In the Mimamsa Shastra, it has been stated in the first sutra, Chodana Lakshanortho Dharmaha. Many a times, Dharma is misinterpreted by these politicians and even by people who are religious. According to me, Dharma is such a thing which mentions the do's and don'ts about your own system or any other system. If you don't observe the do's and don'ts, what happens? The system may crash, as it happens in the case of the computer. You should not keep the computer near fire, or you should not put it in water. All these things have been mentioned in the manual, is it not so? In the same manner, like Ramayana, Mahabharata, Vedas, Bhagavad Gita, that is Holy Bible or Quran, all these things have been very clearly mentioned in the Shastras, that a human being should use his system properly for spiritual emancipation ultimately. Dharma is very interesting thing because Kama refers to the needs of the human being and Artha refers to the resources of the human being. The needs of the human beings have to be fulfilled using resources or acquiring resources within the framework of Dharma. Then automatically it leads to spiritual emancipation. Spiritual emancipation is the best word according to me. whether moksha takes place, or we go to Vaikuntha, or we get the what do you call it? That is Jivan Mukti, etc. It doesn't very much matter. On the other hand, whether any human being has got spiritual emancipation or not, whether we have given him that education or not, is the most important thing. I think it is definitely all inclusive in that respect. So, while I was doing this type of research work, I came across a beautiful statement in the Sri Bhashya. First, whether we should, when you think of the education system, whether we should expose the students to the graphics or to the sounds. Probably many people may not agree with me. Even if you don't agree with me, I'll be extremely happy, no problem. When we begin the lessons to young children, particularly in the kindergarten or something, what the teacher will do? She will show A and she will say A stands for apple. But many times there can be an image of the ass also. We begin our education with ass or apple. When you think of the apple, what does the student actually understand? It is a fruit that is to be eaten. So our modern education begins with the concept of bhoga, according to me, not with yoga. On the other hand, if you go to the education system of the past, first they would introduce the akara. Akaro vai sarvavak, aksharanam akarosmi, ayiti narayanasya bhagavataha prathama vidhan. That's what Patanjali says in his Mahabhashya. So, it refers to the Sarva Rakshaka, or the protector of this particular universe. I am not mentioning Narayana as a deity here. Naranam Ayanam or Naraha Ayanam Yasyasaha. If you take that particular interpretation, he is the person who is actually protecting us, the Supreme Brahman who is protecting us. So, where is the concept of I here and where is the concept of Ye there? And what we do is, we show the graphics first, the orthographic representation of that particular sound. In fact, even today I have not understood what is the sound that is represented by A in English. Is it A or A or A? Why B should succeed A? That also I don't understand. There is no reason or rhyme. After Akara you come to Bakara, is it? Whereas when Panini gives his particular alphabetical system, how beautiful it is. Akoha Visarjaniyanam Kantha Icheshanam Tado, etc., etc. How beautifully he has designed our speech box and how beautifully he explains it. When I was giving a detailed explanation about this to Dr. Raja Ramana before his death, he said, Lakshmi Raja, this is not grammar, this is all physics. That's what he told me. So I will not go into those things. According to me, the children should be first exposed to the sounds rather than the graphics or the orthographic representation of those sounds. That's why Ramanuja says, Ashtavarsham Brahmanam Upaniyita Tamadhyapayet iti Vedakhya Akshararashehe Grahanam Vidhiyate. First, don't teach the meaning. Let them be exposed, let their brain be exposed to the sounds rather than their orthographic representation. Now, whenever we think what happens, we have lost this Shauta Parampara, we have gone to the Lekhana Parampara. I want to mention two important things here. Vyasa had to engage a scribe to record his Mahabharata. Was Vyasa a literate or illiterate? According to modern terms, Vyasa should be called an illiterate because he didn't know how to read and write. But he could compose all the 18 Puranas and he could dictate the entire Mahabharata to Lord Ganesha. Similarly, Ramanuja had to engage a scribe called Kuresha, who was his disciple, to take down Sri Bhashya when he dictated. Probably he didn't know how to write. If you go through the manuscripts, which are written nearly 600 years ago or 800 years ago, most of the Sanskrit scholars used to engage scribes to write down whatever they stated. Even today, I see so many folk people in Uttar Pradesh and so many other places who can recite the entire Tulsi Ramayana, but they don't know how to read and write. From the modern perspective, they are all illiterates. And they spread literacy by spending crores and crores of rupees. It is adult education or adultery education, I don't know. I don't want to say anything about that. Something happens like that. So, that is what happens. Ramanuja says, first expose him to the sounds. Regarding the Vedanta education, he says, when he is exposed to the Vedic sounds and when he is made to learn the Vedas, along with the Angas or the 6 subsidiary subjects, namely Siksha, Vyakaranam, Chandaha, Niruktam, Jyotisham, Tatha, Kalpascheti, Shadangani, then automatically what happens? He will get a superficial knowledge of the Vedic texts. Because of the experience in these 6 Anga subjects or subsidiary subjects, he will get a knowledge of Vedas. He will have a superficial knowledge of the meanings that have been conveyed by the Vedas. Then what he says is, he would like to know the meanings of the sentences perfectly. So he will enter into the field of Mimamsa. In Shribhashya, he has discussed this particular point in an elaborate manner. Whether Vedanta Jnana, Brahma Jignasa is ordained by the Shastras. Is it Vaidha or it is Ragata Prapta? According to Ramanuja, this is Ragata Prapta. Because there will be a natural inquisition, that is instinct in him to learn the Vedanta. Because he understands the entire world. First he goes through Purva Mimamsa. He understands all the different rituals, yajnayagas, etc., etc. He experiences everything. And ultimately he comes to the conclusion, there is nothing in this. Plavahyete adridhaha yajnarupaha. And then he will discard all those things. I have seen so many information technologists like this. They are all great Mimamsakas according to me. They work for 30, 35 years, up to 35 years, and afterwards they want to quit that particular field and go to some other field. 2 or 3 students have come from America and they are studying Vedanta with me in Melkote. They say, we have earned enough and I don't want to go into that field again. Forget about information technology, I don't want to go. So, in a way, it is almost like the Mimamsa system. You perform so many yajnayagas, go to the heaven and come back again, etc., go to the heaven. So, Punarapi Janam, Punarapi Maranam, Punarapi Janni Jatareshainam, this will be happening. So, from that point of view, they want to have a sort of spiritual education, which is very much needed to get permanent bliss, unalloyed bliss, and which is not vitiated by any of the sufferings of the physical world. So, from this point of view, what Ramanuja did was, there is a natural instinct in the human being to inquire into the nature of the Brahman, because it gives you unalloyed and continuous bliss. From that point of view, it's a very important point. That's what he stated. So, Ramanuja did not uphold the written tradition. On the other hand, the oral tradition itself. And oral tradition is very much important now. Many a times, I think in the morning also, so many things are stated. How to relate it to the modern world? Now, oral tradition is coming back according to me. Yesterday, one person approached me. I have written a book called Ramanuja, his life, etc., life works, etc. He is an information technologist. He comes and tells me, sir, I don't have time to read. I am an information technologist. I am working nearly for 8 to 10 hours per day. My eye aches and I cannot study anything when I go back home. So please do one thing. Please record the entire text. Read it before the recorder. Record the whole thing and give it to me. I'll put it in my pen drive and put it in a car. And while I'm traveling, actually, I'll be going on hearing the life and works of Ramanuja. In that way, I can read, otherwise I cannot read. That means, in a different way, we are coming back to the oral tradition. From the written tradition, we are back to the oral tradition. Probably in your everything is available in your cell phones here afterwards. Probably even your speeches can be recorded and it can be sent. Now, what should be the content of the education? As I mentioned just now, the purpose of human life and the 4 important goals of human life has to be understood. Any education given to the individual should be conducive to the achievement of these human goals. In the scriptures, it is clearly established that real education is that which is conducive for spiritual emancipation. I was explaining this. In one of the Bhagavad Gita, that is text on Nammalvar's commentary on Nammalvar Thiruvayamadi, one particular shloka has been quoted. Tat karma yan nabandhaya sa vidya ya vimukte ayasaya aparam karma vidyanya shilpanaipunam. Tat karma yan nabandhaya. So that work or that duty which will not bind you to this physical world, that is real karma. That means you must do karma yoga. And then sa vidya ya vimukte. The real vidya is that which is conducive to spiritual emancipation. Ayasaya aparam karma. All the other karmas or activities you do is only tiring, and at the same time Vidyanya Shilpanaipunam, the other skills you acquire is a sort of skill to eke out your livelihood. In that particular place, he has mentioned in a different manner. Bhagavad Vishayattai Valiya. I don't know whether many of you can understand Tamil or not. Bhagavad Vishayattai Valiya. Mattavayallam Sharuppu Kutta Kattavo Padi. That's what he says. I know how to stitch the shoe. You may say like that, yes, you have acquired that skill, definitely it's good, but it is only to fill up your belly, nothing more than that. It will not lead to spiritual emancipation. So from that point of view, the content of education should ultimately lead to spiritual emancipation. If that is there, probably it is all-inclusive education according to me. According to Ramanuja, the consummation of this education is only when one studies Vedanta. In Vedartha Sangraha, he has mentioned a very beautiful statement. Vedanta Shravanayanihi Vyutpatti Puriyate. If your Vyutpatti is to be complete, then you have to study Vedanta, otherwise it will not be complete. In what context does he mention this? According to Ramanuja, the entire world is a combination of Chit, Achit and Ishvara, as you mentioned in the morning. It is a unified whole. That's also the worldview according to Ramanuja. And Chit and Achit are the inseparable parts of the Supreme Brahman. And he also says, Chit, Achit form the body of the Ishvara. When we mention the body, most of the Madhvas always object to this and say, if it is the body of the Ishvara, then what happens? He must undergo all the sufferings of the body. Ishvara should also undergo all the sufferings. In fact, there was a discussion between me and Dr. Prahlachar, who was my student earlier. I said, you Madhvas are always worried about the technical terms. On the other hand, you don't understand the spirit of this. Do you accept the immanence of God everywhere or not? You please tell me. Do you accept the Antaryamita of God everywhere or not? You tell me. If you accept the Antaryamita, He is in your body also. Then should He undergo all the sufferings of your body? Then he said, no, it's not. So when we say body, when the technical term is used, immediately you pounce upon me and say, no, this is not correct. In fact, Ramanuja is very intelligent and he has used this particular statement to define the body. Yasya chetanasya yadravyam sarvatmana niyantum dharayituncha shakyam tat sheshabhutancha tattasya shariram. Yasya chetanasya yadravyam sarvatmana niyantum dharayituncha shakyam tat sheshabhutancha tattasya shariram. This is the concept of sharira shariri bhava. It's a concept. It is not merely body or forming a body or something. That means something, a particular conscious being is capable of controlling something completely. And this consciousness is capable of sustaining that particular system. And it is also, the other system is subservient to this consciousness. That is the concept of sharira shariri bhava. From that point of view, God can control the individual souls, and it is subservient to Him, and the individual souls are sustained by the presence of the Supreme Being. So He becomes the body of the Supreme Being. Similarly, the prakritika shariras, or the physical bodies, are also controlled by the body, controlled by the individual self, and it is sustained by the individual self, and it is also subservient to the individual self. So the physical body becomes the body of the individual soul, and these two become the body of the Supreme Being. In that way, he explains. And this is a beautiful system which is arrived at by Ramanuja according to Vedic passages. How much time I have?
10
I
minutes more,
complete.
sir,
Almost
please.
over. Then alone he would be able to realize, if we understand this particular thing, then Ramanuja says one more important thing. Whether you call him Allah or Ishvara or God or dog, whatever it is, Sarve Shabdaha Paramatmane Eva Vachakaha. Because Shabda and Artha are so much interrelated. There is no Artha without a Shabda, there is no Shabda without a Artha. Pada Padarthayoho Avinabhavas Sambandha Vartate. If that is the case, any word you attain, it refers to a particular object. That particular object has got the physical system in that, or the Prakriti in that, and the individual self, and also the Supreme Self. Everywhere these three things are present. So what happens? Whatever you say ultimately refers to the God through these two things. Achetana and Chetana Padartha, it ultimately refers to the Supreme Being. It is called the denotation and connotation. Though they denote different things, ultimately they connote the Supreme Being, that's what they say. From this point of view, any word chanted or any word pronounced by anybody ultimately becomes the sacred name of the Lord. With these words, I want to conclude my small presentation. If there are any mistakes, kindly excuse me, it belongs to me. If there are good things, it all belongs to my Acharya. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Lakshmi Tatachar, for your wonderful speech. Now I request Professor Jodh Singh to kindly present his paper. Please. Title of the paper of Professor Jodh Singh is Universality in Sikhism.
Honorable Chairperson and the galaxy of scholars sitting in the hall. Well, I'm not big scholar of Indian philosophy, but since I have done my PhD from BHU before doing MA in philosophy, so I am supposed to know something. And yesterday, really, sir, it was a great occasion for me that you, V.N. Jha, he just told, although we all knew it, but not in that context, I had at least not thought. Earth and calm and dharma comes before all these. And then need and greed, he explained. There was really a great talk yesterday. Well, the Sikh spiritual consciousness, what was the consciousness of Sikhism? In fact, Sikhism is a very new religion. It's not very, it cannot be compared with Hinduism or even Islam also, because Islam was also quite earlier. It's simply with the advent of Guru Nanak in the year 1469, he was born, and then he happened to travel throughout India, went to all the places of Hindus, and even he went up to Makkah also, where he happened to meet some of the Qazis, held some dialogue. So he could see that our country had been the country of Shastras, of course of Shastras also, but they were never combined with each other. Shastra was, people working on Shastras, they had as if their own separate community, and those who are having Shastras, weapons, they have nothing to do with the Shastras. So he could see that this disbalance should be somehow be covered. Well, I'll just read my paper and try to finish within the stipulated time. The Sanskrit language and literature has not only influenced the Punjabi or Hindi languages, but also on the level of philosophy and poetry has provided the subject matter to all the Indian and foreign literature as well. Story of Ram by Valmiki has reached up to Java, Sumatra, Cambodia and Thailand. And perhaps there is no main Indian language in which this story has not been adopted. The life and activities of Lord Ram and Krishna have been influencing the mindset of Indians for the last thousands of years. The masses have always remained full of devotion, love for life, entertaining and protective activities of Lord Krishna. In the later Puranic literature, the character of Lord Krishna got further development, and in the Bhagavad Puran, a work of 9th century, the Raslila of Krishna and his affection for gopis have given further details of his mental makeup. In this Puran, an intimate devotee of Lord Krishna has been mentioned, who furthermore in Brahma Vaivarta Puran has emerged in the shape of Radhika, who out of all gopis was the most important and influential entity. The personality of Lord Krishna, which has been shown in the Mahabharata, is the basic historical entity who afterwards in the literature gradually got changed, developed and finally made disorderly. It was not that, but made disorderly. Perhaps it was done in the view of ascendancy of Buddhism, Jainism and Shaivism, whose leaders were having a very high esteem in the eyes of people, and perhaps to save and make Bhagavad Dharma the center of attraction, it was necessary for the leaders of the religious temperament to show and take into esteem the greatness of Lord Krishna, and the various Leelas were created and put before the masses who readily accepted them. The creation of Bhagavad Puran, in which the greatness and power of Lord Krishna has been shown, is the monumental work produced in the south, and one could say the devotional spirituality emerged in the contrast of monism, which was supposed to have left no scope for devotion and its further proliferation among the masses. Ramanuj, 11th century, Madhva, 1199 to 1300, Nimbark, 11th, 12th centuries, Vallabh, 15th century, et al. Are stalwarts who interpreted the teachings of the great Shankaracharya in their own way, giving further dimensions to the Dvaitavad so that it could become the palpable philosophy of life instead of dry intellectual exercise. Here, one is reminded of the troubled times of Guru Nanak outside Punjab and the foreign lands. In year 1499, he left his native village and went to almost all the pilgrimage centers in North India, East India, South India, up to Sri Lanka, and in west up to Makkah, crossing Iran, Iraq, Turkey, etc., and came back to his village Kartarpur at the bank of river Ravi. Ravi is modern name of Iravati. It was Iravati. Vyas is a modern name, its name was Vipasha. So these all 5 rivers were there. In India, he happened to go to the most famous center of Vallabh sect related to the devotion of Lord Krishna, and the second one was Radha Vallabh sect, which had produced lot of literature pertaining to Lord Krishna and the devotion of the people towards him. Philosophically, the main doctrine of the Vallabh sect is Shuddha Dvaitvad. And the way of devotion developed from this is known as Pushti Marg, in which Raganuga Bhakti is given more importance. In the beginning, in this sect, the special place was given to the devotion towards Bal Krishna, child Krishna, who was gradually replaced by Radha Krishna. Now the women and male devotees were educated to become the gopis and Krishna. As a result, the programs of cow grazing were done at the daytime, and in the evening or night, Ras Leelas were enacted. It was now natural that the holy devotion of the Pushti Marg got stuck into the slush of amorous play and sensuality. The poets belonging to Ashtachap group of poets, these Ashtachap people were Surdas, Kumbandas, Paramanandas, Krishnadas, Govind Swami, Cheet Swami, Chaturbhujas, and finally Nandas. So this group of poets, through their poetry, produced such a literature which was all touching the boundaries of voluptuousness, though the art aspect of the poetry was satisfactory. Now one is compelled to think that from ethical point of view, how much this way of life could take the people higher, which is hard to explain, and the reader themselves could guess only. Acharya Kshemendra was equipped with multi-dimensional genius. His lifespan is generally accepted 990 to 1066 AD, and Dashavatar Charitam was his last work. He has to his credit about 14-15 works, but the most famous is Dashavatar Charit. In this work, Krishna Avatar is included, which reflects the devotion of the poet, and further one finds proficient use of alankars, and his description of the nature at the bank of Yamuna are profusely decorated with the descriptions of nature. The practical knowledge is reflected of the poet in those places where the description is of making cons to understand the righteous way by accrue. But contemporary Indian political or social circumstances have nowhere been hinted at by the poet. In India, during those times, whereas on the one side the Hindu Pandits were severely engaged in debates with the Buddhist philosophers, and Buddhism was almost likely to be the thing of the past, on the other hand, Muslim invaders were making the beeline for looting the Indian subcontinent. In a year, that was very much surprising thing, that in the year 712, the loot of India had started when Muhammad bin Qasim, a 17-year young boy, had directly attacked India to plunder it thoroughly, and whereafter capturing the Sindh province, he killed King Dahir there. Moreover, the famous loot of Somnath temple in 1026 had occurred in the lifetime of Acharya Kshemendra. But apart from it, the Dasavatar Charitam gives even no hint of the loots and killings of Mathura, Thanesar, Kannauj, etc. However, in whole of the older literature of India, perhaps Krishna emerges as such a person who has realized the life of common people in very close manner, because He is such a person who has experienced the general life of a villager. He is a citizen, he is a warrior, as well as such a rishi who has the capability of breaking the traditions. One could very well understand the Krishna avatar in the Dasham Granth created by Guru Gobind Singh. Guru Gobind Singh has also compiled an anthology, and it is known as Dasham Granth, in which he has whole of the Indian cultural activities and cultural people and warriors. There he has made in Guru Granth these things are simply names are there. But here he has taken full stories of Krishna avatar and Rama avatar is the main thing in that. And luckily I have translated that into English as well as into Hindi also. So, whereas the Rama avatar has been depicted by Guru in 864 stanzas, in Krishna avatar 2492 stanzas and a variety of meters have been used by the Guru. Technically, he was also very strong in, this literary pursuits. 150 types of meters have been used in the Dasham Granth. 100, and they are Varnik also, they are Matrik also, and all types of chandas or these meters they have been used. However, among the descriptions of all the 24 incarnation, the Krishna avatar has occupied the largest place in the Dasam Granth. The whole Bani of the Sikh Gurus, which is compiled in Guru Granth Sahib, and all the other works as well are replete with contemporary consciousness. During his long journeys, Guru Nanak had himself seen the followers of Vallabh sect engaged in amorous activities at Mathura and Vrindavan. After the expulsion of Buddhism from India, Hindu society engrossed in ritualism got further divided into castes and subcastes. He himself had witnessed them all at Haridwar, Kashi, Gaya, Jagannath Puri and Pushkar, etc. He happened to go to all these places. Apart from this, in the year 1520, the Guru himself had witnessed the first attack of Babur while he was near Lahore and had reacted vehemently through the heart-rending description of that event, which is preserved there in Guru Granth Sahib on page number 360. He says, as if crying like a child, he is talking to the God, Khurasan khasmana kiya, Hindustan daraya. Oh my God, you have worked like a great master for the person who has come from Khurasan, that is Babur. And he has just terrorized the whole of India. So he was near Lahore at that time and had vehemently through the heart-rending description of that event, which is there on page 360. In fact, in the medieval devotional tradition of India, Guru Nanak was the alone person, this is also notable, was the alone person who has used word Hindustan and being full of anger has condemned the Indians for spoiling this great land which was like diamond and jewels. So this is really, I was also surprised to see this, that when I did my MA in Hindi and when I did my Sahitya Ratna also, I happened to read that literature and I was very much fond of medieval literature. But there was no word Hindustan used by any poet. It was Guru Nanak who was the first person to use this word, Khurasan khasmana kiya, Hindustan daraya. The 10th Guru has also contributed a lot towards literature, although he has used the plots from Markandeya Puran and the 10th chapter of Bhagavad Puran. However, he has evaluated the characters while keeping in view the contemporary circumstances in the 17th and 18th centuries. In view of the oneness of humanity and common spirituality, Guru Gobind Singh created the Khalsa at Anandpur township in the year 1699 and further created a new history in the socio-religious and political affairs of India. This was consciousness about the contemporary situations and a sort of responsibility towards humanity which the great Guru imposed upon every sphere of life of Indian people. Could anybody think in the erstwhile spiritual traditions of India that the barber, nai, washerman, dhobi, water carrier, those who just bring water for the whole of the village, the farmers and the kshatriyas will partake the amrit from the same one bowl? Nobody could imagine it in those times. And will not only spiritually be bound with each other, rather they with their full spirit of warriors would defend the boundaries of country later on came to be known India. The feeling of helplessness was a great general phenomena in the medieval Indian spiritual thought. Internal and external reasons had created a peculiar type of inferiority complex in the hearts and minds of Indian people. In such circumstances, although one happens to see here and there the warriors such as Rana Pratap and Shivaji, but even then, the social and religious position of common man was moving from bad to worse. The bravery was being used to destroy our own people of this land. And the knowledge had become simply a weapon of debates and internal animosity. In his great work, Krishna Avatar, Guru Gobind Singh, keeping in view the saint soldier person, visualized a human being who is vertically as well as horizontally developed personality. Such a person is that type of spiritualist who, accepting this body as the medium for good actions, makes it a house of patience. He, lighting the lamp of wisdom in it, with the help of the broom of knowledge, pushes out the house, the garbage of helplessness. This is in Krishna Avatar. In Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says that the highly educated people should not use their mental faculty to make people unattached to the life of activity, and they should not push those others into confusion having less scholarship. The educated person should remain deeply attached to Nishkam Karma, and it is expected of him further that he should inspire others to do so. Bhagavad Gita, 3rd chapter, 26th slok. But I think the Indians, perhaps most of them, maybe took this Nishkam Karma as no karma at all. And Nishkam Karma means don't have the hope of the fruit. But perhaps it was taken in this sense more that no karma is required to be done. But the Siddhas, Naths and most of the yogis on the one hand had bade goodbye to the struggles of life, and on the other made even many kings to abdicate their kingdoms and inspired them to have deep devotion in their hearts after wearing saffron clothes. The king of Bengal, Raja Gopi Chand, and Queen Manamati, Bhartrihari of Ujjain, Puran Bhagat Chauranginath of Sialkot, and Raja Rasalu et al. Are such examples who, after leaving away the pleasures of kingdom, accepted Yoga Marg and became yogis. Gorakhnath, Jalandharnath et al. Were the persons who got them entered into yogic devotion. When King Gopi Chand of Bengal abdicated his throne, the whole of India was rudely shocked, and even up to this day, this incident is remembered in folklore poetry. However, as mentioned above, one can take cognizance of the spiritual ethical situation in which, in fact, nothing more was spiritual which could bind the people and bring them together to share mutual sorrows and sufferings. One could safely say that in the medieval period in India, 10 types of sannyasis, 12 types of yogis having various sects and subsects were moving from place to place, doing nothing for the upliftment of the society through spiritual unification, which required to be a joint venture. In fact, sectarian intolerance, however, overshadows the fact that religion is not an end in itself. It is a means for the achievement of some goal. It is good to look religious by going particularly to temple, gurdwara, church, but it is more important to one to see one's conduct during the period when one is out of these religious places. People daily observe many religious activities in many forms. They listen to sermons and read scriptures regularly. Rather, they sometimes deliver long commentaries thereon, but simultaneously and deliberately, they not only conveniently forget the instructions or injunctions, they violate them too. Then a way of life is organized in a particular system, it becomes a particular religion in the common sense of the word. People forget that, like other human institutions, all the great religious systems also have both merits and defects, which should be boldly appreciated and rejected respectively. All the religious systems, for their survival, are required to have a futuristic outlook, along with discarding of the what bad has crept in during the centuries already past. In fact, there is great obstacle on the way of free and frank discussion of a religious concept, because nobody is ready to tolerate even the slightest criticism of a particular dogma. Along with this all, the arrogance plays such a nasty role that even without reading or knowing about others' way of life, people do not hesitate in condemning the beliefs and religious systems of others. Needless to say that people do understand and know this all. General acceptance of above notwithstanding, one is pained to find why, despite the growth of learning and material advancement, one society hates the others. Why a religion wants to make others bow before it, and why nations on the so-called basis of religion want to annihilate other nations professing different beliefs. In the context of present-day situation, the obstacles on the way of religious harmony may be understood as follows. Firstly, one of the main reasons for the lack of religious concordance is the unwillingness of the people to understand the deep truths of their own religion, not of the other's religion. Even people do not like to know the deep truths about their own religion. People enjoy their respective dogmatic slumber and at the most feel contented by performing certain external rituals. Indulgence in gross forms of the religion sometimes widens the rift among the various groups and even internal layer of the adherents. religious symbols adopted by people indicate towards the very high goals, which are conveniently forgotten by the followers, and in most cases, the outer components are misused. This all is on account of misunderstanding of internal deep truths of religion. Today, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, all are suffering from such idiosyncrasy, which is nothing less than unfortunate because it develops a distaste and even positive antagonism among people towards religion, which perhaps no religion itself would like to afford. One of the biggest hurdles on the way of spiritual concordance are those people who day in and day out are busy in filling to the brims the minds of laity that their religion is the only godly religion on earth and other scriptures are the only conductor scriptures are the only conductors of divinity. They intersperse superstitions and dogmas in the hearts and minds of the people in order to exploit their full selves. Their scriptures are final word of truth for them, and the universal truth of other religions are either unacceptable to them, or if at all they care for them, they consider them as half-truths. This deformity does not stop here only. Rather, under the strain of such impulse, the adherents of the so-called superior religion force others to follow them and thus deem themselves to be earning merits, punya. Medieval Indian history is witness to such action of forced proselytization and consequent storms of cruelties. Sikhism stood firmly against dogmatism and mythical superstitions. Sikh gurus never imposed their thinking upon others in order to make others feel the inferiority of their faith. Says Guru Amar Das, the third Guru, he says, Jagat jalanda rakh le apni kirpa dhar. Jit duare ubre, titte leho ubar. It's not that only through the dwar of my religion. No, jit duare. Every religion is enough competent for that. So he says, jit duare ubre titte leho ubar. Oh God, the world is burning in the fire of malice, violence and hatred. Redeem it, O Lord, through any gate of dharma. Obviously, we find here the Guru not claiming any particular faith or disclaiming any other faith for final liberation. Implicitly, all the religions have been considered fit for spiritual elevation. Guru Gobind Singh rather also had the same point in mind when in Akal Ustat he declared, Dehra Maseet Soi, Puja aur Nivaj Oi. Manas sabbe ek pe anek ko bhramav hai. And then he further says, Hindu Turak ko Rafzi Imam Safi, Manas ki jaat sabbe ek ke pehchan. After all, they all are human beings. To practice the premise of unity of humanity, the Sikhs and the Gurus had never lagged behind. To guide the Sikhs, perhaps the hymns of Gurus were quite sufficient, but the inclusion of Jaidev from Bengal, Namdev Maharashtra, Ravidas Uttar Pradesh, Kabir Uttar Pradesh, Ramanand Uttar Pradesh, Sheikh Farid Multan, now in Pakistan, and Bhikhan in Guru Granth Sahib by Guru Arjan Dev had a definite vision of spirituality uniting the disintegration-oriented forces and the masses being led astray. Language has also proved to be a vital nerve for communal harmony. So far, no work of Sanskrit or Arabic, Persian could be traced where the concepts and terminology of other than their own language have been used or taken into consideration. However, it is the Guru Granth Sahib where a liberal attitude has been adopted by the Gurus, and the Sanskrit, Arabic, Persian, Hindi, Punjabi phraseology, syntax, and even concepts have been open-heartedly used to make people feel the brotherhood of humanity and fatherhood of one God. It is nothing but irony of vested interests that to collect scientific knowledge and its consequent benefits, all the people of world are absolutely unhesitant in depending upon one another. We rather note that every day many treaties and know-how exchange agreements are signed among various countries, but it is unfortunate that to elevate the spiritual level with the help of others, why an inferiority complex has been developed in this advanced age of scientific growth. Here, it may be cleared and noted that the appreciative acceptance of good elements of any religion in no way can engulf and swallow the other religion. Seeking help or goodwill from neighbor does not mean that one has given license to the fellow dwellers for interfering in one's domestic affairs. Moreover, this dictum is not supposed to be imposed on any particular one religion. If all the religions are allowed to accept, I say allowed because their netas will never allow. If all the religions are allowed to accept this open-heartedly, the work of spiritual unification can develop of its own, and the need for the processions and special functions for national integration will be automatically lessened. By accepting the great truth of interdependence of religions, intolerance can be lessened. Harmony can be brought about among various religions and among the various levels and layers of the same religion as well. However, for the zealots of any religion, Max Muller has very aptly declared, "He who knows only one religion knows no religion." The great scholar of German. However, for knowing the crux of other religion, one is required to go into dialogue and not debate with the adherents of other religions. We all know that dialogue creates happiness, joy, and delight, whereas debate not only creates ego but also pushes the person into the cobweb of quarrels. I think 5-10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Okay,
10 to
thank
15
you.
minutes.
Sikhism, out of the sense of goodness, without any calculation, holds that fight for righteousness and justice should be fought, even if it is not in the case of one's own particular religion or social group. Guru Tegh Bahadur, the 9th Guru, Guru Tegh Bahadur set an healthy model of goodness of human reality in the medieval period fanatic scenario of India, where he laid down his head for the safety of Brahminic society and faith, whose he neither was a member nor he ever accepted their tenets. In the times of Aurangzeb, the Kashmiri Pandits, they were called and they were asked to accept Islam. They said, "Sir, no, if our that Guru has accepted, then only we can." Then he called the Guru. The Chandni Chowk Gurdwara is there in Delhi, in that memory only, where he was slaughtered like anything. He said, he was asked to accept Islam. He said, "No, my religion is all right and I am not going to change it." And then ultimately, he did not accept, so the Kashmiri Pandits, they were also saved somehow. So it was the urge for ethical values, justice, and religious freedom which inspired him to sacrifice his head under the tyrannical ruler's sword. Promotion and diffusion of goodness without any calculation, ethical values, justice, and religious freedom require the openness of heart and mind, which may be attained through the dialogue with the different layers of the society, in which, while saying you, one knows clearly that I am saying you to someone who is an I, and I say, and who says you to me. A new solidarity and spiritual religiosity through meaningful dialogue is required to be evolved by recognizing and identifying those insoluble substances which have the potential of exploding in violence, guile, or politics. To save the self from polemical and disputational egotist mentality, the Sikh religion and Gurbani talk of a meaningful, factual, and self-analyzing dialogue. Indeed, the Gurbani clearly denotes two types of dialogue. The first form of dialogue is the dialogue with the self-appraisal or peeping into the self. Before the external dialogue, the Gurbani inspires first to look into one's own heart and mind. Getting face to face one's own self, one comes to know about his or her own meanness, shallowness, and the layers of self-interest, greeds, and diplomacy. Guru Nanak went to Multan, he collected the Vani of Sheikh Farid also. And there is one line in Sheikh Farid, Farida Jetu Akal Latif, Kale Lekh na Lekh, Apnade Girevan mein Sir Neema kar de. Sir jukakar bhai pehle. So Guru liked this line and he took it, and that is there in Guru Granth now. So long we do not cleanse out the dirt of above named propensities with the broom of knowledge emanated from considered thought, we cannot become pure and unpolluted, and our external dialogue cannot be meaningful. Guru Arjan Dev finally deduced on the penultimate page of Guru Granth Sahib that in this great salver thali, three things, namely Sat, Santoh, truth, contentment, and vichar, thoughtfulness, have been placed. And of course, these three are based on the ambrosial name of the Lord. In the Guru Granth Sahib, the first requisite of the thoughtfulness has also been mentioned by saying that the truth ought to reside in the heart, and while sitting in the company of the wise, instead of calculation-based ego, inflation, and disputation, the right and the wrong should be pondered upon. And there are few lines of Guru Angad Dev, which I am skipping. Self-analysis brings the stage of auto-suggestion. For auto-suggestion, one need not go to search any guru in person. The basic truths of life are so simple, straight, and less in number that every individual can distinguish them in his own self. The world is not stable. Everything is in a flux, which is always in a forward motion. Then why this fat ego? We also have to move from this place. Then why this fat ego? The realization that how much this ego has made me hollow and how much suffering I myself have created can be attained only by having dialogue with one's own self. Such a person understands that he, while not becoming obstruction in the deeds being performed around in the will of God, should allow the flow of the divine will through his body unhindered, and should be always active for the victory of the wondrous Lord. The service to humanity should be considered service to the Lord, and thus spiritual happiness should be cultivated. I think I should stop here now. The time is.
Thank you, Professor Singh, for
There
this
are 2-3 pages
wonderful,
that I want.
revealing presentation.
Thank you.
Now, please take your seat here. So, I now announce the closure of this plenary session with thanks to the organizer, Chinmoy International Foundation, especially and personally to Swami Advayanandaji, Professor V. N. Jha, my teacher, most respectfully and proudly, Dr. Dilip Rana, and other officers, and the audience of scholars gathered here. Thank you very much.